Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for taking some time out of the middle of your day to join us for a brief webinar and a conversation that we're having with a educator in the United States in New York City School District. His name is Robert Meyer, and he is a advocate of Zenphi and uses the product. And um, I believe Robert's in the New York City School District, correct? And has quite a large school, and you're the math chair. If I remember correctly. What I'd like you to do, Robert, just go ahead and take the first few minutes to tell us about yourself and tell us your Zenfi story.
Absolutely, yes. And thank you, Tim. I am a math teacher in the New York City School District. My school is located on Staten Island, New York. And I am also the program chair there. So a little bit different. I'm not necessarily in charge of my department, but I do have some bigger responsibilities as program chair. And my responsibilities include anywhere from helping schedule 3,000 plus students, as you see on the slide there. And in addition to well over 300 in staff, and that includes teachers, administration, support staff, all of the above. Um, I've been a math teacher for a little bit over, this is going to be my 12th year, finishing up my 12th year, but I've only been program chair for about 2 or 3 years. And I actually started being program chair right around the time when COVID hit. So to give a little bit of perspective about my school and about many schools, I'm assuming at least I know in the New York City school district area, a lot of processes and a lot of record keeping is done on a manual basis, meaning support staff, school aides, secretaries, even teachers and administration are usually involved with any process that involves either collecting data, sending out reports, things like that. So I came in to that position at a very unique time. During that time is when I got to see all these processes firsthand. And me being in always looking forward, I guess you could say, with technology and finding easier ways and more efficient ways of doing things. After seeing some of these processes, it was blowing my mind how they were done. So it really started with our COVID process. But like I mentioned, I've been in this position for a little bit closer to about 2 years now, or about a year and a half, right after COVID hit. Um, and while I'm witnessing these processes, and it started with COVID tracing. Um, so due to the fact that schools reopened and had very strict policies with COVID, any student, any staff, any person entering the building was ultimately going to be traced, so to speak, if they wound up testing positive for COVID. On a typical case, this involved anywhere from 6 to 8 people to track one case. And that's because of the amount of different things that were involved with it. The biggest thing being having the ability to trace all the other people that could possibly be affected. Um, Long story short, that kind of got me into looking for alternatives and different tools that could be used instead of requiring 6 to 8 people for one case on a daily basis and sometimes multiple times per day. I needed some type of automation tool, which led me to Zenphi.
What parts of the COVID tracing did Zenfi automate? We're we're on Google Workspace, and we do a lot of we fix manual processes, right? And repetitive processes. So how did that help you in your COVID tracing? What did it do?
So that's the big thing that I wanted to mention is that if you're not familiar with Zenphi, that Zenphi is a program that's focused strictly on Google Workspace. So that requires you to be familiar with the Google apps, not something that I was too familiar with beforehand. And the only reason why I'm mentioning it is because if anybody's thinking of that as um, a deterring factor, oh, I'm not familiar with Google Workspace. I went from not being very familiar with it at all to
Mm.
now comfortably saying that I'm pretty fluent with it. All I use is Google Workspace now. But to go back to the process, it would start with the pilot case, right? So let's say you have a student who reported themselves positive. Um, it started with the time frame. So back when schools and buildings first reopened, there was a little bit of stricter policies, but we had to calculate from when the time of the case was reported, the
Mhm.
time of the case when the student or staff can return back into the building. So just that in itself had the HR department and the administration. That's the part that they were taking care of, making sure that either the student, staff, whoever was not in the building until they were supposed to be. In addition to that, then we had to pull out some reports and some records to try to trace any potential students that would have been in close contact. This was a much bigger task because during a typical day, a student can interact with anywhere from 30 to over 200 students, depending on the size of their
It
class.
it had to be. I can't imagine having to manage that. So,
Yes. So like just pulling those records and that's was the bigger piece. So that we would have anywhere between 3 to 4, maybe even 5 people looking up class schedules, looking up students who were in that day, looking up absent reports. Maybe there was a student who was absent that day and they weren't necessarily in close contact. So there was a lot of pieces that had to be in play. Who was the teacher that day? Who else was in the room that day? So we had different classes and this could have been in the same room throughout the period, throughout the time of the day. All of that got replaced by me having the ability to take those databases, the class schedules, the building schedules, the teacher schedules, making one big database for that and having everything automated through Zenphi. So that's actually one of the things that I uh, I was prepared to show here, and I think yeah. So wanted to share two specific examples of the workflows that I use with Zenphi. And workflows is just the term used not just with Zenphi, but a lot of automation companies. A workflow is literally step one. This is what I'm doing first to the last step. What's my final product or what's my end goal or what am I trying to accomplish with whatever process I'm trying to automate.
sure.
So I wanted to include two workflows that I use pretty much on a daily basis or on a regular basis. So the first one here that's on the screen, this one was actually used relatively recently. Um, and this is supposed to mimic or mirror what a mail merge would typically look like. So our second term, our second semester just started recently and it started on a Tuesday. And on the Thursday before that weekend, my administration then came up to me and said, we have no way of notifying the students where to report to on day one, new term, everybody gets a new schedule, everything. Um, is there a way that we can email the students with their assignments, where the
Right.
or who their teacher is? So I created this. Again, we have approximately about 3,000 students enrolled in the building at any given time. So a mail merge would have its own benefits and its own, I guess, cons also. Something like this took me about 10 minutes to create this workflow.
Sure. So let's step through it. I'm going to describe what the general overview, and then I'll let you give us the specifics as to what it does. So for those of you that are new to Zenphi, or this may be your first experience, every Zenphi workflow starts off with a trigger at the very top. And then the things in between the trigger are we call actions. And you drag those in from our flow, in our flow designer, you just drag them into the workflow and it runs from the top to the bottom. So each action underneath the other one is dependent on the one something above it, right? And then it just runs until it gets to the bottom. So what do you have in your workflow here, Robert? Why don't you kind of step us through it?
So the first two steps that you'll see there is something that I've become fond of. And again, this is through my experience with Zenphi. I've been using it on a daily basis now pretty much for over a year. The first two steps are something that I've been fond of and something that I use now on all of my workflows, where the current date and time that you see there, basically a timestamp. So as soon as that workflow begins, whether I'm using an on-demand trigger or one of the other triggers that I use, it's basically making a timestamp. So I'm doing this workflow at this date at this time. Boom. The second step is also something that I've become fond of, where I'm just creating a run name. This is easier just in the back end so that if I'm looking for specific workflows to see what it produced and if there was any errors or things like that, will just make the workflow a lot easier to identify and to locate it. Um,
Absolutely.
the real steps for the mail merge portion of it started with step three. And this is where the automation aspect of it really comes into play and you can really get an idea of it. So the Bell schedule is exactly that, right? We had a PDF copy of our new Bell schedule that was going to be starting for the second term. So I wanted every student who's going to be receiving an email to receive that PDF copy.
And this action is like a Google Drive, searching Google Drives folder,
Yes.
right?
So
Okay.
I'm giving Zenphi a command to look through a specific folder and to look for a specific file. And there's some names that I have to put in there. I'm telling it exactly what to search. Once it searches for that, then I will be including that into the actual email. So I'm basically locating the file in a
Mhm.
specific folder that I'm telling Zenphi to look at. The read students, that's a separate file that I have that I created where it's basically an enrollment of all the students that we have in our building.
Spreadsheet, correct?
Spreadsheet
Spreadsheet.
from A to Z, Google Sheets, nothing fancy about that, a typical Google Sheets spreadsheet. Um, Now for the next part, and this is a better indicator of what the automation process will do, is it says for each student. What that
Mhm.
means is that every student that reads in that spreadsheet, it's going to repeat the same steps that fall underneath there for every student, which is in this case to send them an email. So I would read their email in that spreadsheet. It had all the information I needed, names, email address, things like that. Um, and then the last step, which was in the for each student loop process, was to send the actual email. Hey, student A, here's your schedule. Here's the attachment for the new bell times. Please report to this room on this day.
So what this allows you to do then, and the great thing is it allows you to keep all of your data in one spreadsheet, in one master spreadsheet. So you have one source of truth. You don't have a bunch of spreadsheets floating around in different teachers in the offices or whatever. And then, and secondly, is it's personalized for each student. That's what that for each loop does. So when the student opens it up, it can be their specific schedule and it has has their name on it. It's not a general, like a photocopy of something that gets sent to them. Yeah, that's great. So let's jump over to something to the next slide. And this is uh, we don't want to scare y'all for the off the bat. So we're going to ramp up here, but it's not scary. It's just, it does a lot. So what do you got here?
But yeah, so like I said, the previous slide, just to give everyone an example on something that can be used very on a very basic scale. And this is something that I use on a little bit more of an intricate scale. So Tim, like you mentioned before, there are actions in Zenphi called the triggers. So depending on what trigger you select will trigger the workflow to begin or not. So for this particular one, I decided to use a new file added to Google Drive. So what that means is this is something that you have to do on the back end, something that I did on the back end. I created a folder that was going to be specifically used and dedicated for dropping files into that folder. Depending on what that file was, I would have Zenphi read it. And then based on what file name it was that Zenphi read, would branch off into different parts of this workflow. So this workflow in particular, I use for some of our database updates. So New York City and many schools, I'm sure, are uh, very diligent with their special education policies and procedures, and there's very strict laws and rules that we have to follow and abide by. So one of my responsibilities as program chair when I first started was to keep these databases up to date. There were a few different files that were necessary in order to keep these databases up to date. And I found it to be very time consuming, not too difficult, not too intricate, but there was just steps that needed to be
Of
followed a little
time.
bit more. So ideally, some of the processes that I was responsible for were expected to be done or should be done on a daily basis. The amount of time that it took to complete some of these processes, it just wasn't feasible. So instead of every day, I was updating them usually once a week, maybe in the beginning of the week on a Monday or a Tuesday or something. Um, and each time I updated them took anywhere from 2 to 4 hours, depending on certain factors that were coming in, which is what led me to not doing it every day, just because
Yeah, would want to, right?
yeah,
But really, it's not something you look forward to, I'm sure.
no. Uh, Now, being able to use Zenphi, understanding some of the functionality of it and some of the steps and actions that are allowed to take, um, updating these databases is now something that I do on a daily basis. So the only thing that's required of me now that all of these workflows are put into place is I have to download a fresh file. And I usually do it in the morning when I first come in. I literally take that file, drop it into the folder that I have dedicated as my update folder, and let Zenfi do the rest. So I literally have minimized my job responsibility from a couple hours on a daily basis. It should have been to within a few minutes, literally a few minutes, however long it takes me to download the file and put it into the folder. Um, that alone has increased the compliance factor. We just got a report last week because it was just brought to my attention and put on my desk last week. This time last year, we were at about 46% compliance, which is not good by any
Right.
stretch. We are now at 89% compliance in less than a year.
You
Um,
doubled it pretty much, doubled your compliance rates. That's
yes.
great. And this is the type of thing that Zempi really it is built for, is to build to manage these manual tasks that are repeatable. And now you're submitting one document to do this thing. And if you can look, if you guys can see on the screen, I know it's really small, but this branches off into 3 or 4 different branches, and it's based on a file name, and then that'll determine which branch it's going to go down and do its thing. You told me a great story the last time we spoke about there was I believe a gentleman or somebody who was uh, for substitute teachers who was maintaining a list or something of substitute teachers. Can you tell us that, please?
Yes. So just one of the other things, I joke around with people all the time where now I've been so comfortable and so fluent with Zenfi that I pretty much go out of my way to look for new ways to implement it and to incorporate it. It came across my attention that someone in our school, one of the aides who's responsible for assigning the substitute teachers to any teachers that were absent, he would basically take a template of the letter that would be given to substitutes, make a blank copy for every single teacher in the building. And like I said, like you on the slide, is close to about 300 people on staff in my building. And depending on the calls that he got, he would manually write them in. So
300.
yes. So he was manually writing in, and this is he does this on a daily basis. So like for me, for instance, if I'm calling out for the rest of the week, he would have to manually write my information on 4 or 5 different letters so that it's prepared for the substitute teacher when they come in that morning. In addition to that, he was getting very frustrated because the information that he was getting wasn't always accurate. So for instance, if there was a change in my schedule as a teacher, I'm teaching periods 1, 2, and 3, but now that was changed to 1, 4, and 5.
And he just got done writing out the whole thing.
Yes. And that's not necessarily information he got in a timely fashion.
Mhm.
So taking this all into consideration, I was like, listen, I can do something better. I can do something easier for you. how about I create a Google form, which is one of the options as using a trigger for Zenphi,
Sure.
and I'll include the teachers' names. All you have to do is fill out the date that they're going to be out. You could check off the teachers that are going to be out on that day. Within a couple of minutes, you'll get a letter that's automatically generated. In addition to having the letter that's automatically generated, so he doesn't have to sit there handwriting all these letters on a daily basis, it was going to be reading from my files, which, if you remember from the other slide, is going to be updated now on a daily basis. He's going to have the most accurate information for whatever day he's doing his work, and it's eliminating his manual process of handwriting letters in. And then, of course, in addition to that, I made the template nice and pretty because I did everything on Google Workspace. So instead of a letter that looked like it was typed up in 1985 on a typewriter, I put some nice graphics on it. I made it look pretty. And I made it look like it belonged in 2023.
So the first time he ran that, what was his reaction?
So he usually reported into the building early because he had to be there early to make sure the substitutes doubtful their assignments. So by the time I came in already that morning, 2 or 3 people had notified me that he was looking for me and that he was um later on that week, the right people, I guess, started hearing about it and my administration heard about it. And again, this was something that I did on my own. Nobody asked me to do it. I saw a problem or I saw something that could be done easier and more
Yeah.
efficiently. So I just took the initiative and did it. And well, not that it's anything too crazy, but I did get some shout outs and some bragging rights in our weekly newsletter from our principal. So the work that I'm doing has been recognized almost immediately.
Mhm.
Uh, and I don't think of it like that. I think of it as I'm making or I'm trying to make people's lives easier.
My goodness, his hands alone, all that writing.
So, so this has been in implemented now for about 2 weeks. I don't think there's been a day that's gone by that I see him and he's not thanking me and extremely happy. Oh my God, it's so great. I can't believe it. Yeah. So I'm eliminating hours and hours of work from one person with something
Yeah.
that I consider to be relatively easy, not too difficult.
So sometimes it takes these process changes. We're coming in for a landing here. Takes not everybody's going to embrace it with open arms right away because it's changing the way they do things. But it's been my experience that over time you have to let it cook for a little while, and then as people start to see the results, you get buy-in until everyone's then I've seen it where people are then coming to you, hey, can you automate this? Can it do this? Can you? Yeah, and I'm sure you've seen that before. And in closing, can you speak to the New York City area? And I believe that Zenvi is approved in the New York City school district, being the largest school district in the United States. Can you speak to that just a little bit?
Yes. And I'll build off the last thing you just said, which I think was like perfect is those I think will be the two biggest pushbacks, or at least from my experience being New York City and knowing how the New York City school district functions, is the approval portion of it. So pretty much anything that we use, anything that we want to purchase has to be approved by New York City Department of Ed and New York City governing services, whatever, and they are. But that also goes into my second part where with the pushback. So I helped in the process with Zenphi to try to get approved for New York City. And it was a long process in the making. It took close to about 8 months to get Zenphi approved with after paperwork going back and forth and whatever. But during that time, they were gracious enough to allow me to keep using the product. And any pushback that I got from my administration, my supervisors, whoever, all that pushback was silenced once I could give the final product. And what I
Mhm.
mean by that is once I'm showing them the end result of some of the things that I'm doing and some of the workflows that I'm producing, it's like you said, it's no longer like, all right, how can this, I'm skeptical about this program or I don't think it's going to work, to now, can we use this program for this? And can you do this with Zenphi? And can you do that? So I've seen the shift change over the past couple of months from, oh, what is this company? Why do you keep mentioning it, to now, what else can we use this for?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Robert, I think we're about at our time. Thank you so much for joining us today and uh, sharing your story of Zenphi. Most educational systems do use Google Workspace. If you want to start a free trial, go ahead and navigate to zenphi.com, and up in the right corner of the screen, you'll notice where you can start for free. And we'd be happy to work with you. And Robert, I'll just let you close out. How's your support experience been with Zenphi?
The support and the staff has been incredible. They're ultimate. I'm not just saying that. Like, they really are. Anytime I have questions on whether it has to do with the back end of it, or even setting up a workflow or errors that I might get or something like that, um, everybody's been super responsive and super supportive. And I would like to even extend that out to anybody who's watching this, whether you're in the education field as a teacher or programmer or anything like that. If there's anything that you're curious about, reach out to Zenphi, and I'm sure they know how to contact me. I'd be more than willing to help. And I'd also be interested to see if anybody else in the education field is using it and has anything to offer or suggest to me. I'm always looking for new ideas too.